Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, let me welcome you to the prize-winning lectures, and we divided the things. So first will be Siddharth Mishra, and I will be the chair, and then Dominic Schillinger and Fernando Auricchio will be the chair. So we're trying to move fast, and I introduce Siddharth Mishra. He is born in India 35 years ago, approximately, and then he did his PhD with 25 at the Indian Institute of Science and the Tata Institute in Bangalore, and after that he moved for 4 years to Oslo, and then you will see that he moved between Oslo and ETH several times. By now he is associate professor at ETH in the Seminar of Applied Mathematics, and he is also a professor in Oslo and in Bangalore, where they know him from his PhD. He has gotten a starting grant from the ERC in 2012 and has visits to INRIA, University of Maryland, and the Weizmann Institute. He has already 9 PhD students, more than 50 articles, 1 book. So let's see about his area. He is numerical analyst, scientific computing, modeling on mostly working with non-linear PDEs. The conservation law is an example, Banach's law, fluid dynamics, magnetohydrodynamics, and also astrophysics with the sun and biological systems. I consider one of his early discovery was we have worked with the ENO reconstruction many times that nobody has observed for 30 years, that you can actually use that to design entropy stable schemes. So that, I think, is one of the already old results by him, and the newest one is probably computing entropy measure solution and convergence of numerical schemes to that. So I will stop at this point, not to steal his time, and he is now Siddharth Mishra.
Thank you very much, Roel, for this very kind and also rather short introduction. I like that very much. I take this opportunity to thank President of GAN and other members of the prize committee who selected me for the Von Mises Prize. I'm really honored. And I also take this opportunity to thank the local organizers for putting together such a splendid meeting in such a beautiful city. It's a pity that the weather is not so good, but it was really beautiful to be here. So thank you very much. Without further ado, let me start my lecture, and I'll talk about systems of conservation laws. So if you're interested in understanding the dynamics of the global climate, or to design efficient aircraft, this is CFD simulation of a full aircraft, or to study interesting phenomena in astrophysics, such as the collapse of the supernova, you can't see that here, then these and many other problems of interest, the key ingredient in the mathematical model are nonlinear PDEs which look like this. They're called systems of conservation laws. Capital U is a vector, it's a vector of conserved quantities or unknowns. Capital F is a flux function. There are many examples, but the prototypical example are the compressible order equations of gas dynamics, where the conserved quantities are the density, the momentum, and the total energy. And there are many examples of this that all of you know about. I'm looking at a subset which are hyperbolic conservation laws, where finite speed of propagation is the key effect. And one of the sort of prototypical mathematical features, physical features of these equations is the fact that the nonlinearity creates shocks. So what do I mean by that? Even if you start with smooth initial data, in finite time, actually in very short time if you want, you have the formation of discontinuities or shock waves. There are other kinds of discontinuities also. So you cannot talk about classical solutions of these equations. Smooth functions. So-called weak solutions, you have to interpret the solutions in the sense of distributions, and you have to allow for discontinuities. But whenever you look at weak solutions, they need not be unique. You have to put in some extra conditions, admissibility criteria, and these are often called entropy conditions. So the set or the class of solutions that we are looking at are entropy solutions. They're sort of vanishing up there. I'm interested in numerical methods, and numerical methods for these equations have been known since the last 50 years, with a lot of development over the last 30 years or so. Many frameworks exist, The most popular frameworks are the so-called finite volume or finite difference schemes. This is essentially discrete conservation. So this is just a one-dimensional cartoon to illustrate the ideas. So what you do is that you have a grid in space and time, and you look at the rate of change of a certain quantity. Let's say the cell averages are given in terms of flux functions. So this is just discrete conservation. And these fluxes, numerical fluxes, they're computed by either exact or approximate Riemann solvers. There are some famous Riemann solvers that are there. If you want high order schemes, then one has to do some sort of reconstruction, polynomial reconstruction, replace piecewise constants with piecewise polynomials. But since the underlying solutions that you're trying to approximate are discontinuous, it's essential to have some sort of non-oscillatory procedure to do that. And there are various keywords which do it: total variation diminishing, ENO, VNO, also discontinuous Galerkin finite element methods. There are various methods to do so. You can do very efficient time stepping. And the point is that these things are well known in a CFD course now, and they're highly successful in practice. Let me give you some examples from my own work. So this is the simulation of a mega tsunami, which was at Lituya Bay in Alaska. Done with this group here. We use the two-layer shallow water equations. You can see that the landslide creates a tsunami. Very nice simulation here. Second example is a three-dimensional. You see a cross-section, shock bubble interaction, Euler equations, and you can see the features of turbulence which come in here. Third example is with the ideal magnetohydrodynamic equations. And this is a simulation of the Alfvén waves in the solar atmosphere, of these beautiful wave patterns and so on. And there are many, many examples, not just in my research group, but also you saw in the lecture yesterday, many, many examples that are there. But I work in a math department, and they won't pay my salary if I just show you pretty pictures and videos. I have to prove something. So when you come to numerical analysis, the usual questions are there: stability of the approximation, convergence as the mesh is refined, and of course, if possible, convergence rates. And the state of the art is, if you have single conservation law, scalar equations like the Burgers equation, then all these questions are answered, more or less. Whereas if you have systems of conservation laws, like the Euler equations, then you have very few results, if any, actually. And what I'm going to talk about is to close this gap and to say that something really can be done at the level of systems of conservation laws in terms of numerical analysis. So the first question that I tackle is the question of stability of the approximations. And you have to have a notion of stability. What sort of stability cuts across all these equations that I've just told you about? And this is what is called entropy stability. So let me just illustrate it by a one-dimensional conservation law. Similar considerations apply also in several space dimensions. So you have the conservation law here. I assume that there exists what is called an entropy function. It's usually a convex function, and entropy flux function. And then we define what are called entropy variables and entropy potential. The details are not important here. Then one can prove a relation like this for smooth solutions. And by doing some manipulations, which are essentially chain rule, one can show that if the solutions of these equations are smooth, then in addition to the equation, differential equation, it also satisfies an additional conservation law, the so-called entropy identity, which is true for smooth solutions. But I told you that the solutions are not smooth, there are shock waves. So because of that, you have entropy dissipation at shocks, or also due to viscous effects, and you get entropy inequality. So this is the entropy inequality that I spoke about in the beginning. And this entropy function is convex. So when you integrate this inequality in space, what you get are some bounds on U, particularly in the space of square integrable functions. So this is, as soon as a conservation law has an entropy function, you have a generic notion of stability that is there. So the question is, can we do it at the level of numerical methods? And this was actually done by Tadmor, you can't see that here, in 1987, quite some time back. And the idea is to essentially mimic these calculations that I showed you at the discrete level. So for simplicity, again, I talk about one space dimension. So this is a finite volume or a finite difference scheme. And the flux function here is divided into two parts. The first part is the so-called entropy conservative flux. So if you did not have this part, if you just had this F star, then essentially you can mimic these calculations here. Remember that this red identity is the key one. And if you do it at a discrete level, this is a jump in entropy variables with the flux in terms of the jump in entropy potential. So Tadmor realized that you can essentially mimic these calculations, and you get an entropy identity But you know that entropy identity is not good because we have shocks and so on. So you have to add some dissipation. And this dissipation is done in terms of entropy variables because we can't track shocks, we capture them. So you add this dissipation in terms of entropy variables, and the whole package here will give you a discrete version of this guy here. So you have entropy stability. And the only problem here is that these schemes are first order accurate. So they're not very effective numerically. And you would like to do that at high order. And this is what we did, arbitrary high order, in fact, whatever order of accuracy you want. And to do so, it's not so hard to do this entropy conservative flux at arbitrary high order. What is harder is to design a numerical diffusion operator. For those of you who know some finite difference of finite elements, what you do is that you had piecewise constants to get first order accuracy, and you want to get high order accuracy, so just replace it by, for instance, piecewise linears, piecewise quadratics, and so on. Do a reconstruction. So here, and instead of using the jump in the entropy variables in the piecewise constants, you use a jump in the reconstructed variables here. So if you do that, you have at least the basis of an arbitrary high order scheme. But we proved together with a PhD student of mine, former PhD student of mine, and Ethan Tadmore, that if you do this reconstruction in some special variables, so-called scale entropy variables, but the key thing here is you have to have the so-called sign property. So this was a new discovery. So what we want is that the reconstruction should be, it can't be arbitrary. It should be such that the signs are the same. So you look at the jump here, and look at the sign in the original entropy, sign of the jump of the original entropy variables, which is here. It should coincide with the sign of the jump in the reconstructed variables. So in particular, the reconstruction here doesn't work because the sign of the jump is positive in the original variables, and in the reconstructed variables, it's going to be negative. So you have to enforce this kind of a property in the reconstruction. If you don't, then you don't have, or at least you don't necessarily have entropy stability. But then we have just converted the problem into having to get a reconstruction procedure which has the sign property. And this is far from being trivial, particularly at arbitrary high order. And it is here that we really got lucky. We didn't expect this. There is a reconstruction procedure, which is a very famous one due to Harton and others, Osher and Enquist and so on, the so-called ENO, essentially non-oscillatory reconstruction procedure, which has been existing for the last 30 years. We were able to prove, and I really mean prove, that this satisfies the sign property for any order. So even if you have 10th order polynomials, still the sign property is going to be satisfied. And it is for arbitrary grids, at least in one space dimension. You can have arbitrary grid spacings. You still have this property. So extremely powerful property, and no one realized that you can actually do that. And just to illustrate, this is piecewise quartex. So you have fourth order reconstruction. You can see some random cell averages here and the reconstruction, and observe that the reconstruction can be really wild. You have large oscillations, but still the sign is the same. For instance, here the sign of the original variables, the jump is negative, and the reconstructed variables also the sign is negative. And that's all you need for entropy stability. So you have a lot of freedom there. So together with the ENO reconstruction procedure and the entropy conservative fluxes, we are able to design entropy stable schemes at arbitrary high order. These are some numerical examples. I'm not going to focus on the numerical examples here. These schemes have the same sort of efficiency as the ENO scheme, third, fourth, and fifth order. And only thing is that you have a proof that these schemes are stable. And this is again second order, third order, fourth order, all with the Euler equations. And you can see that if you increase the order, you have better results. This is well known. But the new thing is that we have a proof that indeed these schemes are going to be stable. And you have all kinds of extensions. Once the basic idea is there, you can extend it to unstructured grids, at least for second order accurate schemes, to fully discrete schemes. And also there is a class of finite element methods, which we are designing, the so-called space-time discontinuous Galerkin methods, which satisfy some version of this. And there are some results on that. So at least when it comes to stability of the approximation, the first question, we have a positive result. Not for every scheme on Earth, but for many, many schemes, you have a positive result, that they are indeed stable. The second question is, of course, convergence. Once you have stability, you would like to answer the question of convergence. Unfortunately, for nonlinear PDEs, you don't have a lax equivalence theorem. For linear PDEs, stability and consistency are enough to give you convergence, but for nonlinear PDEs, this is not enough. And in fact, at the moment, the situation is such that for systems of conservation laws, you have zero. You have no rigorous convergence results for numerical methods, even for 1D. let alone multi-D. Certainly for multi-D, you have no rigorous convergence results. But people have been computing these things for the last 30 years. So what was the approach? It was a very engineering approach that we use some benchmark numerical experiments, and we see if there is convergence or empirical convergence for these experiments. If it is there, then we compute a physically realistic problem with that. And indeed, this is a viable approach. Let's look at some examples here, simple examples. So this is just a radial shock tube in 2 space dimensions with Euler equations, 128 square grid. Unfortunately, you can't see that it's 128 squared. But if you refine, you get better result at 256 squared, even better result at 512 squared. If you don't know the exact solution, it doesn't matter. What you can do is that you can just compute the difference between successive resolutions, and you get a graph like this. Difference between successive resolutions goes down as you refine the mesh. So at least these guys form a Cauchy sequence in L1, and so at least empirically they are going to converge. So this was Euler equations with a second order scheme and with periodic boundary conditions, this very simple initial data. And then people try to compute more complicated problems. But the problem is that if you want to prove that some numerical method converges, then you have to take all initial data. You can't just take very specific initial data. And this is where the problems start. What I'll do now is I'll compute a little more realistic problem, but still not very realistic. This is the so-called Kelvin-Helmholtz problem, well known. So you have initially, you still have the Euler equations, periodic boundary conditions, the same scheme as before, only different initial conditions. So you have a heavy fluid in between, you have light fluids on both sides because we have periodic boundary conditions, and you have a shear. So this is the same scheme, 128 squared. Now look at what happens if I refine 256 squared, 512 squared, you get smaller and smaller eddies, not unexpected. 1024 squared, even smaller eddies, as you can suspect. So at least visually that doesn't, and you can keep on doing this game. You'll get smaller and smaller scale features. So at least visually you don't have any convergence. And if you compute the difference in different levels of resolution, in fact we did this up to 8092 squared. I just don't show it because there's no time. You see that this is a flat line. So you will not have any empirical convergence in this case. You will argue that this is not unexpected, this is so-called unstable problem, but then if you want to prove a theorem of convergence, you have to deal with these unstable problems. Otherwise, you cannot have a theorem of convergence. So in fact, this problem and any other problem, many problems, what they show is that if you refine resolution, these are inviscid problems, there is no small scale. As you refine, you have more and more small scale phenomena. So at each scale, you get smaller and smaller scale phenomena. You have other examples, Rickmeyer-Meshkov, Rayleigh-Taylor, any kind of unstable or turbulent flow. And I use these words very, very weakly and vaguely. You don't expect any kind of convergence. And in fact, it does not matter what numerical method you used. We have used finite difference schemes, finite element schemes, spectral methods. The behavior is exactly the same. So it does not depend on the numerical method. There's something else fundamental which is going wrong here. And that's why we can't prove a theorem of convergence. So what is going wrong? So you remember this picture that as you refine, you have finer and finer scale features. But what I do is if I take a slightly different perspective, which is I do some sort of randomization. So what do I mean by that? So this is my initial data. So instead of aligning the shock with the initial discontinuity, contact discontinuity with the grid, I just put it in between the grid, but do it randomly. So the location inside the grid is done randomly, and I do it 200 times. And then I compute a statistical quantity, for instance, 1 point probability density function. This is with 128 squared, 256 squared, 512 squared, and 1024 squared. At least to the eye, you see that this quantity seems to converge. And it's completely different from what we saw here, where there didn't seem any convergence of this, let's say, the solution itself. So if you take a statistical perspective, at least to the eyeball, there seems to be some convergence. So let me summarize that. So at least most numerical approximations, they don't seem to converge as the mesh is refined, and this is probably not unexpected. That's why you cannot prove a convergence theorem to entropy solutions in this case. You have presence of structures at smaller and smaller scales, but what is surprising is, or probably not, is that there is convergence of statistical quantities, even if there is nothing statistical in this particular problem. And we try to make it more rigorous or formalize it or put it in a framework, and we do so in the framework of mesh-evaluate solutions. This concept was known to people doing analysis of PDE for a long time. It was developed by DiPerna in the 80s, and let me explain it with a picture instead of formulas. So this is your notion of, classical notion of solutions or weak solutions. So this is a time snapshot. So you fix time. Let's say this is your space variable, 1D in this case, and this is your solution. So at each point, or almost every point, we have been given a value. Now this concept of measure-valued solutions changes this. It says that this is the picture that you have to look at. So at every or almost every point, what you have instead of one value, you have a spread, a statistical spread, and you know the interval here, and also you know the weighting, the probability distribution. What is the probability with which each of these values can be taken at every point? So if you do this at every point, or almost every point in mathematical jargon, then you get a measure-valued solution. So you replace a function by what is called a Young measure. This is the basic idea here, that it's a weaker notion of solutions that you can think of, because if there is no statistical spread at a point, then you're back to your notion of weak solutions. You have a Dirac measure. So this is a weakening of the classical notion of solutions that you have, and one can write evolution equations. I will not spend time on formulas because I have very little time. So you can write down the notion of weak solutions, you can do initial data, entropy conditions, and so on. And this was all done by DiPerna 30 years back. So the new thing that we have done is how do we construct or how do we compute these measure-valued solutions. And this is an algorithm which was designed last year by this team here. Let me explain the algorithm, and this is my most important slide somehow. It is not so easy to compute a measure, because this is what we are asking, that instead of computing a function, we want to compute a measure. It's not so easy to do that. But what we can do is there is equivalence between measures and random fields. And this is the equivalence that we are going to exploit. So in the first step, my initial data could be a Young measure. So what I do, and there is a theorem which we proved, that you can always find a random field, may not be uniquely, but you can find a random field whose law is probability law is going to be this initial measure. So there is a correspondence between a random field and a Young measure. Once you have a random field, as in Monte Carlo, what you do is that you take samples, and then once you have samples or realizations, you can evolve this random field by a numerical method of your choice. I use my finite difference, finite volume methods, but someone else can use a finite element method, whatever. And then once you have a solution random field, a computed random field, take the law of that random field. This guy will be a Young measure. So start with a Young measure, go to a random field, evolve it, take back the law of the random field, and you get a Young measure. And there is a theorem that we proved that if your numerical method satisfies a discrete entropy inequality, comes back again, and some control on the oscillation, something called a weak PV bound. I don't explain the formula here, but this is absolutely key. If these two properties are satisfied, then these approximate Young measures actually converge in a suitable sense, and I will tell you what is the suitable sense, to an entropy measure-valued solution. And this is a proof, and this is multidimensional, and it covers a lot of numerical schemes, because these conditions, they're really satisfied by the schemes that I just described to you earlier. And some other schemes also satisfy these conditions. So we have a way of computing this measure-valued solutions and proving that what we compute is indeed a measure-valued solution. What is this convergence? Again, without going into formulas, it is what is called narrow or weak star convergence. Essentially, what we compute or what we can prove converges are not just functionals. You can't talk about point values, you have to talk about functionals, but not just functionals, but rather statistics of functionals of interest. So it's a very weak notion of convergence, but that's okay, because what you observe in reality, this is a weather forecast, for instance, over Oslo, one of the cities that I shuttle between, you don't have one grid point there, you have 30 grid points, so you have a functional, but what you get essentially is statistics of functionals of interest. So this theory tells you that the quantities that come up in measurements are indeed satisfied. So let me just, so there is a theorem behind that, and of course you observe that. So this was the picture. If you take single realizations, you can't expect any convergence, but the moment you take no convergence, as you saw, the moment you take statistical quantities, this is the mean on 200 Monte Carlo samples, and then you see that there is convergence in the eyeball, and also you see that there is a Cauchy sequence here. The variance also converges. You can take higher moments. Variance also converges, as you can see. And we can also put a metric on measures. These are measures, so we cannot have a norm.
we can compute a metric. So we computed the Wasserstein metric between these two measures, successive measures, and you can see that there is convergence also there. And it's essentially you have some sort of strong convergence. So essentially these theorems we have already proved. The PDFs converge, we have a proof for that. And what is most interesting here, probably the most important slide in my entire lecture, is that even if you start with a measure, this is a point probability density function, even if you start with the Dirac measure. So there is no statistical, initial statistical notion of the solution here. What happens in time, so this is at t equal to 0, t equal to 0.5, t equal to 1, t equal to 2, you can see that this measure really spreads out. So you cannot expect that the solutions of these equations can be closed within the class of functions. Even if you start with a function initially, you'll have to expand your class of solutions to measures. If you don't do that, no chance. No chance to get convergence, probably no chance to get existence, and so on. Rolf, can I ask you how much time do I have? 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. So this is the story about measure-valued solutions. We have an algorithm to actually compute them. Of course, there are issues with, so these solutions exist, but there are serious issues with the uniqueness, okay, because it's such a weak notion, so you can't expect uniqueness. In fact, these measure-valued solutions generically are not unique. So a generic measure-valued solution cannot be unique. There is, even weak solutions are not unique. There are some constructions to that case. But what we compute with our numerical methods seems to be very, very stable. What do I mean by that? It is stable. Different numerical schemes give the same measure, and also different types of perturbations give the same measure. It seems to be stable with respect to perturbations. So the conjecture or the hypothesis is that what we are computing is not a generic measure-valued solution, but it is something beyond that, something which is narrower than that. And this is where correlations come in. And let me explain this with pictures rather than with formulas. So remember that measure-valued solution is that at each point you have a probability density function. So you have, you tell me what is the probability of getting the value here, for instance. What it does not contain are information about correlations. So these things could be completely uncorrelated. So in particular, it does not tell me what is the probability that at this point this value is attained, provided that at this point this value is attained. So joint probability density functions or correlations, simply no information is there. That's why there is a lot of scope for uniqueness, because what you do here does not affect what you do here. But the evolution equation itself is coupling up these points. So somehow you have to include correlations. But the problem is, and anyone who does turbulence modeling here knows this, the problem is if you want to look for 2-point correlations or write down an evolution equation for 2-point correlations, because of the nature of nonlinearity, you have to end up with 3-point correlations. So what is the probability of getting this value, provided that this value here is attained and this value is here attained? And you can continue. So 3-point correlations require 4-point correlations, and so on and so forth. So why not incorporate everything by putting probability measures on the class of functions? Now this is really becoming a little bit of rocket science here, and the pointer is also okay. So what we do is, in order to incorporate all possible correlations, we put a measure on the class of functions. So instead of telling what is the probability density, joint probability density between different points, we say what is the probability density function in the space of functions. So just think of this function as an entity and then put a probability density function on top of that. And this is actually what is called a statistical solution. So it's a probability measure on a function space. It becomes a little bit crazy. But the point is, we have been able to show that it characterizes all correlations. So all possible correlations are somehow incorporated by it. Even though it looks very exotic, actually the algorithm that I showed you, we can prove that it converges to a statistical solution. So you have information on all possible correlations. So what I was computing was a little bit narrower, or much considerably narrower than a measure-valued solution. A measure-valued solution, of course, is a statistical solution is a measure-valued solution. And of course, the uniqueness is still very much open. It's a very, very difficult question, as you can imagine. But we can describe turbulent flows because we have information about correlations in a different manner. And also it allows for some uncertainty quantification, because now you have information about correlations. I'll not talk about uncertainty quantification here. So at least the issue of uniqueness, there is some hope, at least in the scope of statistical solutions. From the perspective of computational cost, what I was doing was essentially Monte Carlo. And Monte Carlo, all of us know, is very, very slow. So you have to somehow improve the convergence. One possible solution, which was developed by Heinrich and Giles, and also in terms of conservation laws was done by me together with Christoph Schwab, is to use what is called multi-level Monte Carlo. I will not go into the details here, and we have been able to extend this algorithm that I showed you to compute measure-valued solutions in the sense of multi-level Monte Carlo. But even multi-level Monte Carlo is not cheap, and it has to be employed with really massively parallel high-performance computing platforms. And I'll just end with one picture here. So this is a three-dimensional problem. It's a shock bubble interaction. My initial measure on the probability space is given in terms of a random field whose mean is given here. So this is the bubble here. This is the shock that is going to hit the bubble. This is the variance. So I have 18 parameters to somehow represent the random field. And then we do a multi-level Monte Carlo calculation here. This is the mean here. Very interesting calculation, very interesting structures. But the point is that it took 5 hours on 50,000 processes. And this is the variance here. And the point is, not only do we have algorithms to do that, we also have a proof that this algorithm converges to a statistical solution of the system. Whether this is unique or not is still very much an open question. So I end my rather brief presentation with just a quick summary. I spoke about systems of conservation laws. Similar things also apply to the incompressible Euler equations. I spoke about the design of arbitrary high-order entropy stable schemes. But convergence is a much harder question. And in particular, you cannot expect convergence to entropy solutions, but rather maybe to weaker notions of solutions such as measure-valued solutions, probably statistical solutions. And this is, for me, at least it looks like a suitable solution framework for multidimensional conservation laws. You can describe turbulence with this framework, describe uncertainty quantification. What we're working on is, of course, uniqueness of statistical solutions. Of course, the generic problem is very, very hard. We look at some special cases, and also how to reduce computational cost by, for instance, multi-level Monte Carlo methods, and by really massively parallel high-performance computing architectures. But you really have to combine some very sophisticated mathematics with numerical analysis and scientific computing to make any progress in that direction. And this is what I wanted to give a glimpse of. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for this excellent talk. And now we have to give the floor to the second one. Okay.